Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on Israeli national security, brought to you by the U.S Nazarian Center for Israel Studies at UCLA. I'm Dov Waxman, the director of the Nazarian Center, and it's my pleasure to introduce to you our guest for today's webinar, Dr. Chuck Freilich. Dr. Chuck Freilich is a former Deputy National Security Advisor in Israel and a longtime fellow at Harvard's Belfer Center. He also teaches political science at Columbia, NYU, and Tel Aviv universities. He's the author of a number of books: Zion's Dilemma, How Israel Makes National Security Policy, which was published by Cornell University Press in 2012. The author of Israeli National Security, A New Strategy for an Era of Change, published by Oxford University Press in 2018, which he'll be talking about in the webinar today. And his forthcoming book, which I believe will be coming out sometime next year, is entitled Israel and the Cyber Threat, How the Startup Nation Became a Global Cyber Power, which will be published next year. Before we get underway, I'd just like to thank our co-sponsors for today's event, the UCLA Department of Political Science, the UCLA Department of Public Policy, and the Murray Gallinson San Diego Israel Initiative. I want to thank all of our co-sponsors, and just to remind all of the listeners that this is a live webinar, but it will also be recorded and posted online afterwards for later viewing on our website. So please feel free to tweet it and share it and encourage people to watch this webinar, which I'm sure will be very informative. Throughout the course of the webinar, I invite you and encourage you to send us your questions. We will have plenty of time for Q&A at the end, and I will read out those questions. So please start sending us those questions using the Q&A box in the bottom of your screen. So without further ado, let me thank Professor Freilich for joining us and turn over to him. Thank you, Professor Freilich.
Well, hi, Dov. Let me start by thanking you and the co-sponsors for hosting this. I'm really very happy to be here. This is our first event together since you joined the center. So it's an opportunity for me to say actually how thrilled I am for UCLA and the Nazarian Center that they got someone like you.
Thank you.
And just by the way, your book, Trouble in the Tribe, is right in front of me on my shelf, not because I put it there for this broadcast, but because it's there, because it's a great book and I've made great use of it. So let me talk a little bit about Israeli national security, or the national security strategy. And these are difficult times in Israel, the US, much of the world. So I'm going to start off by doing something which I think is just about unparalleled in the annals of Israeli defense discourse, maybe in Jewish discourse generally, and that is I'm going to start off by saying something positive and optimistic. Okay? Never been done before, I think. I think Israel's national security strategy has actually been a dramatic success. Israel is today an established state, at least until some weeks ago, a couple of months, the Corona crisis. I would have said that we're also a prosperous state, today a little bit less so, and an essentially secure state. When I say essentially secure, that doesn't mean that there aren't some major threats out there. There are, and I will speak about them in a minute. But there are no more existential threats. And unless Iran goes nuclear, there won't be an existential threat, and I believe that we should do everything we can to prevent it, but I believe that we can handle a nuclear Iran if we have to. There are no more conventional threats of consequence. The Iraqi and Syrian armies, which were the basis for IDF planning and training for the last couple of decades, they were the enemy. Those militaries have been devastated by the civil wars, and it will be a very long time before they can pose a significant threat to Israel today. Again, I think really the amazing thing today, talk about a change of regional fortunes. The primary threat that the Arab states pose to Israel today is their weakness. It's not their strength. It's the fact that they are all, without exception, either in deep crisis or even deeper crisis. Some have come apart, and at best, they are all in deep crisis today. Ben-Gurion famously said that if and when Israel had a Jewish population of 5 million, a totally unimaginable number to him. He made a statement in the 50s. He couldn't even conceive of that. Well, we passed the 7 million mark a long time ago. He said that our existence would be assured when we crossed the 5 million point. Israel won its existence. And the question today is what kind of existence we have, not whether we exist anymore. Now, I must say, for pretty good reason, the Jewish people tend to be skeptical and they have a hard time accepting good news. But it's here. And I believe that the result is that Israel is capable today of charting its national course in a way that it's never been able to before. Israel has never been stronger. The Arab side has never been weaker. And there is a window of opportunity, at least for the next few years, I don't know how long it will stay open, to make some of the critical decisions that we have to make, whether it's on the Palestinian issue. We're in the process of rapidly becoming a binational state. Well, we still have some time to prevent that, to try and minimize the really dire processes of delegitimization of Israel around the world, which have made strong inroads into the US, and we'll talk about that. To try and join in with the Sunni states and some of the international community, certainly the United States, in trying to contain Iran. Okay, that's the full side of the glass. The other side of the story is that there are still major threats and that military power still is the basis for Israel's national security and will remain such for a long time to come. I believe that Iran is the most dangerous adversary we've ever faced. It is a sophisticated, carefully calculating player. Now, to some people, they look like a bunch of loonies or Michiganders. They are anything but it. They are extremists, but they are very carefully calculating in how they go about trying to achieve that extremist ideology. Iran is probably the first adversary that we've ever faced, which is too sophisticated, too big, too far away, and too powerful for Israel to be able to defeat it. Now, not to be too worried, I sleep quite well at night. We can handle Iran. We can defend ourselves against it if necessary. I don't think we can defeat it. And Iran has a long-term strategy that I call attrition until destruction. Iran really means it. When they talk about Israel's destruction, they mean it. And the supreme leader enunciated a 9-point plan for Israel's destruction in 2014, and all of the other statements calling for Israel's destruction is something that they, not only do they mean it, and not only do they say it, but they pour major resources into this, and they've paid a very, very high price for decades now because of that commitment to Israel's destruction. So we have to take it very seriously, and the nuclear program is continuing to develop, and potentially they could break out pretty much at any time of their choosing. One of the areas in which they've done the most is in building up Hezbollah as a proxy right on Israel's border, something like 130,000 rockets, possibly more. This is a mammoth rocket arsenal. I think people, including the Israeli public, despite repeated warnings from every possible defense official over the years, people don't yet appreciate the magnitude of the destruction that Israel's home front, the civilian home front, the military rear, are going to suffer in the next round, if and when it breaks out. Now, I'd rather be on the Israeli side of the border than the Lebanese, because Lebanon's going to catch it even harder, but that's a very little comfort. The home front will be hit like it has never been hit. And not only that, the even bigger danger, because most of these rockets are imprecise, but they can hit cities. The big danger now is the increasing number of precise rockets that Iran is providing to them. And that will give them a number of capabilities that no actor in the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict has ever had, no capability. First of all, they'll be able to hit Israel's mobilization processes. And the IDF, of course, is mostly a reservist army. They'll be able to hit mobilization centers, supply depots, weapons stores. they'll be able to disrupt offensive capabilities, air bases, other major facilities. They'll be able to hit the command and control, the decision-making process, whether it's the Prime Minister's office or the IDF General Staff in Tel Aviv, or any one of IDF communications facilities around the country. And finally, and not least, they'll be able to hit some of the critical national infrastructures, such as power plants, and maybe put the entire state of Israel in a blackout. How do you run an advanced society without electrical power? So there are major threats out there. Of course, the nuclear one is the biggest one. Hamas is a much more limited threat. The problem with Hamas is that it's always threatening to erupt. It's a limited conflict. Of course, there's loss of life there, so it's always serious, but it's a limited threat. I think Israel, like many countries in the world today, including the United States, is it's seeing a diminishing return on military force. We're reaching the limits of the utility of military force. Military threats, weapon systems, they've changed in recent decades. I don't think we have a good military solution to any of the primary threats that we face today as a nation. We've been beating the Palestinians for 100 years militarily, and if we have to, we can continue doing so for quite a long time. There's no way, you can't bomb Palestinian nationalism out of existence. It doesn't work. Okay? There's no military solution to a national movement. We can delay the Iranian nuclear program. We have, and if necessary, we can do so again. According to the various reports, Israel has been involved in sabotage programs. We can't destroy it. There's no military option for destroying the program. Delaying, yes. One of the major threats, I mentioned Hezbollah before, but it's Hezbollah on the entire northern front. It's Iran's efforts to set up something like Hezbollah, an equivalent military presence in Syria. We can delay it, but Iran seems to be really determined, and we're fighting an uphill battle there. I'd say probably a losing battle in the sense that, I'm making up a figure, let's say we manage to prevent 90% of their shipments each year. Well, that still means that 10% gets through, and another 10%, and another 10%. So there's no good military solution to the primary challenges. The even worse news is that there may not be a diplomatic solution. We have to be frank with ourselves. And in addition to all of these problems, there's the only one which I consider to be potentially existential, really existential. That's the demographic issue stemming from the West Bank. The delegitimization issue I already mentioned is quite serious. There's a crisis today between Israel and diaspora relations. And of course, there's a whole range of cyber threats, and maybe we can talk about that a bit more in the Q&A. I said that Israel is an established and fundamentally secure state today. And I believe that that means that we can adopt an overall military approach, which I call strategic patience, something which is contradictory to Israel's national character. Patience, strategic patience. But that's how we have to prepare ourselves for a long-term war of attrition, because Iran and Hezbollah know that it's going to take them a couple of decades, and that's fine from their point of view, but they have a goal. And when I say a long-term strategy of patience, first of all, it means a change in mindset. Israel still feels its national psyche is that of the Israel under siege in the early decades, Israel whose existence wasn't yet assured, Israel which may still be destroyed, even though there are very few military leaders in Israel who think that there's any existential danger today. So first we have to change the way we feel, our mindset. And then I would say we should adopt a 5-point military strategy. First of all, restraint. As it is, Israel exercises really pretty remarkable or admirable restraint. We don't respond every time Hamas or whoever attacks. Every once in a while. I think we can show even more restraint because we're strong enough today. We can absorb it. And unless we can really achieve a significant change for the better in a military operation, better to play defense. And for the moment, I don't think we can do that. The second thing is deterrence. It's really hard to achieve deterrence against non-state actors. It took us a few decades, 2 to 3, depending on which of the Arab countries, sometimes more. It took us decades to build up deterrence against Arab state players. It's even harder against Hezbollah and Hamas. I think we're actually doing reasonably well. It's 14 years since the last round with Hezbollah. We've never had that much quiet on the Lebanese border since the 1960s. And with Hamas, it's beginning also. The third element is defense. And when I say defense, what I'm talking is rocket defense. At the moment, Israel has a partial rocket shield. Most people have heard of Iron Dome, which is a really remarkable anti-rocket system. There are a couple of other systems that supplement it. We don't have enough batteries today, and especially enough interceptors for the 130 or 150,000 rockets that Hezbollah has. That's not by chance, because the decision was made to put most of the money into offensive capabilities, and these things cost fortunes. And that fundamental decision I agree with. You can only win a war offensively, not by defending yourself. I still think we have to bite the bullet, and I'm talking a good few $1 billion. If people want, I can elaborate again on the Q&A. I think it's something that has to be done. We have to pay the price, because if we do it, and it's just a matter of money, the capability is there, then we can essentially neutralize the primary threat that the country faces, which is this mammoth Hezbollah arsenal, rocket arsenal. The fourth element is diplomacy. In Israel's early decades, it was all about surviving, living till tomorrow and living to fight another battle. And emphasis was correctly on military solutions, because there was no one to talk to in the early years on the Arab side, the early decades. Today, there are people to talk to, plenty. And so I think we have to put far more emphasis on diplomacy than we have in the past. And in terms of the way to deal with Iran, for example, is through international cooperation, international coalition led by the US. And the final element is military might, because as I said before, Israel's national security is still based first and foremost on that and on the ability to win wars. The two-state solution or separation. I don't think, frankly, I say this with great regret, I don't think there is the slightest chance that we can reach a two-state solution for many years to come, regardless of who is in office in Israel. If a ultra-left-wing government came into power in Israel tomorrow, I don't think it would bring us much closer to a solution. I'd be happy to be put to the test and be proven wrong. I don't think the Palestinians are yet willing to make the kinds of concessions that they must if we're to reach an agreement, and the kind of concessions that at least two previous Israeli governments, Barak and Olmert, were willing to make. Not this government, and this government headed by Mr. Netanyahu is over a decade already. But there were Israeli governments that really bit the bullet and presented dramatic proposals, and they were rejected out of hand by the Palestinian side. And I don't think they're closer to making the kind of decisions they have to. But I think that either reaching a two-state solution, or if we can't do that, just separating from the Palestinians to maintain our character as a predominantly Jewish and democratic state, that's Israel's #1 national objective. And to me, it's a Zionist objective and it's a strategic objective. This isn't political. It's not right, left, Likud, whoever. It's a strategic imperative. If you look at the population today in Israel and the West Bank, not Gaza, just Israel and the West Bank, the combined population, the ratio is 60% Jewish, 40% Muslim. If you add Gaza to the picture, it's more than 50% Muslim. But we withdrew from Gaza. Now, the Zionist movement never set a numerical number, what percentage of the population must be Jewish for Israel to be the nation state of the Jewish people. What we said is it has to be predominantly Jewish. I don't know of any definition whereby 60-40 is a Jewish state. The good news is that Palestinian birth rates are plummeting, Israeli birth rates are comparatively high, so the 60-40 ratio, give or take stays there for the next few decades. So from that point of view, there is some time. On the other hand, the realities on the ground are changing. Land that was available 20 years ago at the height of the peace process, available for land swaps, it's being used for other purposes in the meantime. Not all of it, but some of it, yes. Positions are hardening on both sides. We just saw there was almost an annexation of territory. I believe that's at a minimum that's been postponed. Hopefully it's been prevented, but you see hardening on both sides. There isn't a status quo. That's an illusion. So if we can't reach a solution for the foreseeable future, what can we do? Well, first and foremost, we can preserve the viability of a two-state solution for the future if and when the circumstances are there to reach it, when there are partners on both sides. I think not this government, but another government could begin acting unilaterally to determine Israel's borders and to begin creating a de facto two-state reality, if not a de jure one. And just by the way, if there are any people in the audience who are asking themselves, I have no illusions about a future Palestinian state. I think it will be another failed, irredentist, corrupt, authoritarian Arab state. I don't think there's any reason to think it'll be any more successful than any of the other Arab countries, probably the opposite. And there will be ongoing tensions with it even after a peace agreement. So why? What do you need this for? And the answer is, to me, the overriding objective, just after ensuring Israel's existence and security, is ensuring our character as a predominantly Jewish and vibrantly democratic state. We have to cement the relationship with the United States for the long term. There's a serious question which I raise in the book, and I've presented it in various defense forums in Israel, the National Security Council, the IDF's internal think tank, the IDF planning branch, the Defense Ministry, the Prime Minister's office. I expected people to fall out of their chairs when I asked the question, and what I got was a yawn. The question is, can Israel even survive today without the United States? Now, that's a pretty tough question to ask. It took us 2,000 years to restore our national sovereignty. And after 72 years, we have to ask whether we can exist without the help of another country. Now, I don't know the answer, by the way. In desperate circumstances, people come up with desperate solutions. Maybe Israel can survive without the United States. There is no doubt that it would be an infinitely poorer existence. There's no doubt that it would be an infinitely weaker and less secure existence. It means going back decades in terms of where we are today. No one in Israel, left to right, wants to do that. Well, even a small modulation in American support is an earthquake in Israel. Or to borrow the expression, if the United States sneezes, we get really sick. I believe that we are living on borrowed time at the moment in terms of the bilateral relationship. And we'll talk about this some more, and this is an area in which Dov is also a leading expert. I mean, he wrote the book. There has been a dramatic collapse in support on the Democratic side, especially the liberal progressive side. And we know that much of the Jewish community is there. The Jewish community votes 70, 80% Democratic. And there's been a particular drop among young people on the liberal side. Now, I don't care, this isn't political for me. I don't care, Democratic, Republican. One of the sources of the bilateral relationship was the fact that it was bipartisan. There are lots of reasons why this is happening. Some of them are Israel's fault, or the policies that Israel has pursued in recent years. Some of it, I think, is the fault of the American Jewish community. It doesn't matter. Israel can't allow itself to lose the support of the United States and the American Jewish community. Those are two of the primary pillars of Israel's national security. And I've always believed that Israel must, at times, bite hard. It must almost always adjust its policies to those of the United States. That's how you repay the unrepayable debt that Israel owes to the United States for decades of truly remarkable support. And there's no secret here and there's nothing special. Obviously, a global superpower and a small regional power aren't always going to see every issue exactly the same. That doesn't mean diametric differences, but yes, there are differences at times. Well, Israel just about always has to adjust its policies to those of the US. And if you ask me what is the number one most important thing that Israel could do to ensure the long-term vitality of the relationship, the answer is reach a resolution, not even a solution, but some sort of resolution of the Palestinian issue. Get it off the newspaper, out of the newspapers. Get it off the agenda. Because, yeah, there are differences over some other issues. With the Obama administration, there were significant differences over Iran, but those aren't fundamental issues. We agreed on the objective, there were differences how to get there. There's one issue that divides the United States and Israel or at least the right wing in Israel fundamentally, and that's the Palestinian issue, and it poisons everything. So if we can get that off the table, there's no reason for the relationship not to be strong for the long term. And yes, there are other problems. There are fundamental changes in American demography. We can talk about all of that. But basically, that would be the key to the relationship. Let me say a couple of words about Iran. I mentioned it before, but to focus on the nuclear issue. In terms of military issues, that's the only potentially existential one. And you can debate whether it's really existential or almost existential. There is absolutely no doubt, there is no one in the state of Israel who disagrees with the fact that it is at very least a dire threat, and one which we should do at least everything within reason, maybe not everything possible, but definitely everything within reason to prevent. I think we have to really try and exhaust all of the diplomatic and other options. I'll say something about that in a second, but if and when we really reach the crunch, and we've neared it in the past a number of times, and fortunately the goalposts have repeatedly been pushed forward, but if and when we reach the final moment when it's either launch a military attack or Iran goes nuclear, I believe the state of Israel cannot allow it to happen. Because as bad as that option will be, we won't be able to destroy the program. We'll be able to gain a year, 2, 3, if we're lucky. The blowback will potentially be very severe. I'm less pessimistic about this than some of the others and what you read in the American press, but there may be, I can't deny the possibility, there may be significant regional repercussions. There may even be significant repercussions for the United States and the international community. Again, I'm less pessimistic about that. I think it would be mostly, the Iranian response will be focused primarily against Israel. But the alternative to allow Iran to become a nuclear power, to gain impunity from the United States, from the international community, to be able to threaten Israel's existence, we cannot allow that to happen. In the meantime, what we need, and we don't have this, I don't believe, either in the United States or in Israel, is a comprehensive and a coherent policy towards Iran. Now, I'm all for pressure. The Trump administration calls it maximal pressure, economic and diplomatic. I'm all for it. Countries don't make very, very painful concessions, and they would be for Iran, unless they're under pressure. But that's not a policy. It's an element of a policy. We've seen repeated attacks in Iran the last few weeks. I don't know who's responsible. I certainly hope Israel is responsible for some of it, because if not, then my former colleagues, I don't believe, are earning their salaries. But I'm just saying this as a newspaper reader. I have no knowledge. Sabotage is good. Cyber, kinetic, it buys us time to maybe reach a diplomatic solution. It avoids the need to take direct military action and the consequences that that leads to. So economic and diplomatic pressure, sabotage to buy time. And the real goal is to reach a new and better deal. Some people talk about going back to the JCPOA, or if Mr. Biden is elected, he might do that. I think that would be a terrible mistake, because Mr. Trump has gained, as much as I, for example, think that his withdrawal from the nuclear deal, the so-called JCPOA, the Joint Plan of Comprehensive Plan of Action, I think the withdrawal was a terrible error. But he has gained some leverage since then. To throw that away would be foolhardy. So we use it to help us get back or get to a new and better deal. Now, the unfortunate reality is that any deal which is better for the United States and Israel, and we pretty much share views of what a better deal means, any deal like that is inherently worse for Iran. The only way that they get assigned a new deal is if it's better for them as well. So we should be thinking a great deal about what we could offer them without paying too heavy a price on our side, and what we really need. The only long-term solution to the problem is a diplomatic one. Israel is thought to be a nuclear power, and it maintains a policy known as nuclear ambiguity. It doesn't acknowledge or deny having a nuclear capability. I think that's the right approach. I think it's probably the best thought out and most successful policy Israel has ever had. Some people sort of smirk and they laugh. Oh, you're being childish. What are you denying Israel's or not admitting Israel's a nuclear power? Everybody knows it. For the last 50 years. Well, people know lots of things, and they may be right, they may not be right. This policy has paid off magnificently, because whether Israel is a nuclear power or is not a nuclear power, it has gained all the deterrent advantages that it would have if it had a declared policy. So I think we should maintain that. And we should maintain what's come to be known as the Begin Doctrine, named after Prime Minister Begin. And what the doctrine says is that Israel will do whatever it must, including military action, to prevent a hostile actor in the region from developing a military nuclear capability. In short, Israel will prevent other states in the region from going nuclear. That policy was implemented originally against Iraq in '81, and then against Syria in 2007, when it turned out that they were secretly building a reactor. It has not yet been implemented against Iran, interestingly. And then the question is, there are three likely proliferators in the region today after Iran. Probably, but not for sure in this order: the Saudis, the Turks, the Egyptians. If you notice, all three of them are American allies and have some American commitment to their security. In the case of Turkey, they're actually a NATO member. So the option of bombing, destroying a military program in these countries is not really there. We have to look at new answers to this problem. And let me conclude with one final issue, and that's domestic policy and my belief that because Israel has become an established state, we have the luxury today of looking at domestic policy as being a critical element of national security policy. Overall, one of the really pleasant surprises I had when writing this book was when I got to the chapter about Israeli society and found that, contrary to what I thought, it's actually demonstrated remarkable resilience. It's very strong. It's a source of national strength. And well, I want to end so we can go to the Q&A, but this is an area where Israel is doing something right, and we have to strengthen national resilience because it is a vital source of national security as a whole. Let me end with that. Thanks.
Thank you, Chuck. That was really a tour de force of the horizon of Israel's strategic challenges and its environment. We've received a number of questions, but before I start reading some of those questions, I want to just put my own question, if I may, based upon many of the very smart and sensible things you were saying. And it strikes me that some of these things are said by those in the Israeli security and intelligence establishment, that there is a kind of level-headed, very rational approach to threats and understanding of the value of deterrence and defense, even the role of diplomacy, a kind of a recognition of Israel's strengths and that it doesn't necessarily face these kind of existential threats. And yet, Israeli politicians, Israeli political leaders seem to convey a very different message both to the Israeli domestic public and to the world at large. And all too often, the policies that they pursue, annexation being just one of those, departs from the professional advice of the intelligence and security establishment. You talked about the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear agreement, something that I believe you would know this far better than I, but the kind of the consensus view in the security and intelligence establishment was that it was actually kind of working to some extent, that it wasn't such a bad thing, and yet obviously Prime Minister Netanyahu, pushed Trump to some extent to withdraw and scuttle this arrangement. So you've been on the inside of this process, and you've written about this in your previous book. Why is there this disconnect? Why is it seemingly difficult, even impossible, for the expertise and professional judgments of the experts of national security, such as yourself and others who have been in the inside of the security and intelligence establishment, to actually have their views really heard and to shape policy making in Israel?
There is a disconnect. I agree with you. First of all, let's say we live in a democratic country. We elect our political leaders, and they're sovereign to make whatever decisions they want. So I personally can regret those decisions, but it is totally legitimate. They don't have to, I think they have to listen to us, but I don't think they have to accept a single word if they don't want to. And that's fine. They were elected, we weren't. This has been a situation now really for a number of decades where there's been this disconnect between the majority opinion and the defense establishment. Of course, it's not monolithic. There are strong differences of view within the defense establishment, but the majority position. And of most of the governments in Israel, there have been a few center-left governments over the years, Barak, Olmert, Rabin earlier. But for the last 43 years, Israel has been led most of the time, 35 out of the 43, something like that, by right-wing governments. And they have taken a different approach, which has really been different from that of what the experts say. And then, of course, we get accused of being a bunch of, what should I say, dyed-in-the-wool bureaucrats, and maybe being a deep state. That's a term which is used more frequently lately. There's a problem. Okay, Israeli political life is uniquely difficult, rough and tumble, no holds barred. I don't even know what term to use. It's really difficult political system. I forget who it was who said that an Israeli prime minister has maybe an hour or two to enjoy being elected, and then he spends the rest of his tenure trying to remain in office. And until the last few years, the last coalition or two actually lasted for a while. But if you look for the last couple of decades, most of the governments haven't lasted more than 2 or 3 years, in some cases less. And there hasn't been a single government in Israel's history that's actually lived out its full 4-year term. So prime ministers, from the second they're elected, it's all about coalition management. And coalition management means that they're being pulled in lots of different directions by political considerations, not by policy considerations. I would imagine that there are many cases where the prime minister is saying to himself, really wish I didn't have to do this. Yeah, the security people, they're right, but I can't do it. And that's the reality of political. The professional bureaucracy has to fulfill its role and say what it believes. And
well,
the politicians will do what they do.
Well, I think I'll take some questions now that have been coming in from members of the audience. So, first of all, going back to your description of Hezbollah's rocket arsenal and the really serious threat that poses. So, a couple of questions just kind of about that specifically. One question from Perry Bloom asked, are these rockets too widely dispersed or too well protected to be interdicted or even taken out before firing? I mean, is Israel's only response, in other words, only effective response, deterrence? Is there anything that Israel can do proactively to reduce or manage this threat?
Some people speculate about a potential cyber capability to neutralize at least the advanced ones, the precise ones that I was talking about before. That's a very, very small part of the 130,000. Most of them are old-fashioned kind of rockets, and the cyber attack wouldn't be very effective against them. So the only way to deal with it, really, you say if deterrence works, great, then we don't actually have to go in and do anything. But if we do, it's a combination of a lot of air, and it will require significant ground attack. And the answer is no, we don't know where all of them are. In the 2006 war, when the total arsenal was maybe 13,000 rockets, I thought that was enormous at the time. Now we're talking at least 10 times that. There were cases that it subsequently turned out that IDF soldiers were walking on top of the rockets and they didn't even know it. They were so well camouflaged. Because these things are small and you can literally put them in the kitchen cabinet, and pretty much, I'm slightly overstating the case, but not much, pretty much every home in southern Lebanon has rockets. Whether the owners wanted to collaborate with Hezbollah or whether they didn't want to. The reality is almost every home. Well, yes, they've built up 10 times since 2006, the last war. We've also built up at least that much. As a matter of fact, there was a quote by an Air Force commander a couple of years ago saying that each IDF plane today is capable of doing 10 times what it could have done in 2006. It's not just that. We've built up all sorts of capabilities. So we'll be able to destroy a lot of them from the air, but you have to, if you want to really destroy them, you have to go in by ground. And it's a big ground operation. Now, in the good old days, which weren't so good, when all they had was short-range rockets, if you push them past the Litani River, a couple tens of miles, they were out of range. Today, they've got what we call medium and long-term. This isn't what the United States calls long-term, but long-range. But by Israeli standards, they can cover all of Israel today. So that if you push them back, they can, you're slowly pushing them out of range, but basically you'd have to go to the very, very northern tip of Lebanon. You'd have to occupy the whole country and root out every last rocket if you really want to solve the problem. And that means, aside from the horrific loss of life in the operation, it's not just going in for a few days and going home. You'd have to be there for months to root out every rocket, and that means God knows how many casualties. And the truth is that the price we would pay is probably considerably worse than the threat. So no one's, as bad as it is, no one's avid to do that. Well, so, I was saying before, we don't have a good military solution to the offensive solution to the issue today, which is why I said we have to invest so heavily in defense as well.
So the questions have also come in about Iran and its nuclear program. One policy response to Iran's nuclear program that has been asked about, which you haven't mentioned, is regime change. This is something that purportedly, former National Security Advisor John Bolton has long been an advocate of, and other, neocons in the United States. Given the threat, as you've described it, that Iran poses to Israel, and its determination to invest resources to counter Israel and to challenge it, would regime change be what's your view on regime change as a policy? Would that alter, would you think that would shift Iran's policy toward Israel, or is the Iranian-Israeli rivalry maybe more about two regional powers, you know, battling for hegemony rather than a kind of ideologically driven standoff?
First of all, I think it's ideologically or theocratically driven by Iran. And this is a case, unlike the Palestinian issue where Israel has its own demands, the only thing Israel wants from Iran is to be left alone. It's 1,300 kilometers away, so it'd be great if we could be friends again. If not, live and be well, leave us alone. I really believe that this is a case where the enmity is one-sided. And of course, Israel has to respond, but it's one-sided. I'm all for a regime change, sure. A couple of small problems. Everybody has been trying to do it. Everybody, meaning the American national security and intelligence community, I presume Israel, Britain, all of the primary players, right? Been trying to do it just since 1979. And the problem is nobody knows how to do it. Now, until a couple of months ago, a couple of months being the devastating corona/economic crisis in Iran today, I'll come back to that. I would have said, forget it. It's not a realistic option, at least in a politically relevant time frame. When I say politically relevant, Iran is today having, in essence, withdrawn from the nuclear agreement. It's also, after the US withdrew, they're a few months away from having enough fissile material for a first bomb and a year and a half from having the ability to put it on a missile. So I don't know, then maybe they would want more than one bomb before they decided to declare they have a capability. Within a couple of years, Iran can be a nuclear power, an open, declared, and real nuclear power. At any time they want, they can make the decision. 2 years later, they're there. Can we confidently say that we can change the regime in 2 years? Until now, I would have said no chance whatsoever. Really, and the fact is in '79, nobody's figured out how to do it. Things have changed in the last 2 months. It actually changed a little bit in the last couple of years. Last year, we saw the worst demonstrations in Iran since the revolution, apparently. We saw demonstrations against them in Iraq and Lebanon, like we hadn't seen in the past. And now we have a situation, well, they blew the response to the United States after the Sulaimoni attack. They still haven't recovered from that. This week, President Rouhani announced, this is dramatic, that between 25 and 35 million Iranians, the total population is about 80 million, between 25 and 35 million have been infected by corona, and he anticipated that another 25 to 35 million will still be infected. It's out of control there. As bad as it is in the US or in Israel, it's wonderful compared to Iran. And their economy, as a result, is nosediving. That comes on top of the fact that they've got the dramatic impact of the American sanctions. Their economy, the rial had lost half its value even before all of this started. At the same time, their primary export is oil. The oil market has tanked as well. Add their own ongoing economic mismanagement, and Iran is really in really bad trouble today. So I would say maybe for the first time, maybe there is room to think about it. I don't think there's much that we on the outside can do. This has to come from within Iran, from the Iranian people. And then if it happens, maybe there can be some really quiet, careful support. But remember, any support that gets out, and we live in a world in which pretty much everything gets out, it's tainted, or it taints the people who get it as collaborators with the imperialist Americans or Zionist Israelis. So it's basically got to come from them. I don't see it happening soon. That's why I said the only realistic solution is a diplomatic one. We also don't know, by the way, who the next regime will be. It's hard to imagine that it would be much worse, but that doesn't mean it will be better. It'd be nice to think so.
Thank you. So we have a question about China, or a couple of questions actually that I've asked about China. One, asking your view about Chinese investment in critical Israeli infrastructure, like the port at Haifa, transportation networks. This has been an issue as well in U.S.-Israeli relations recently. So do you think Israel is right to allow this investment? Is it incurring an unnecessary risk? Should it take the US position in this kind of showdown with China, particularly over, the use of China's broadband, internet technology and other forms of infrastructure development?
First of all, it's obvious that in the end, Israel has to take the American position, or pretty much. Okay, there's no doubt. We all know in Israel which side of the bread is buttered. Okay, it's the U.S. You also have to take into account that China is rapidly becoming Israel's second largest commercial partner after the United States, investing big time in at least two areas that are critical to Israel. One is the national infrastructure, which is way behind where it has to be, the roads, trains, and Israel's, putting aside China for the moment, is investing vast fortunes in this. One of the good things that's happening in Israel today is the transportation revolution. It's happening because the country has become one big national traffic jam, so there's no choice. All right, the United States was upset primarily about two things. One was the port of Haifa port being bought by a Chinese company. And let me say, I think this is a case, all countries have their concerns, their, what should I call it, sometimes less than objective positions. Let me put it that way politely. I think there were some limited real concerns about the port issue. I think they've actually been worked out behind the scenes I don't think there's any real danger here. But I think Israel has addressed those concerns, and if there are more, then we have to. And we have to address them. There was concern, the other one was about Chinese investment in high tech in Israel generally, cyber, and especially Huawei investing in 5G, fifth generation cellular infrastructure in Israel. That's been given the kiss of death recently. No one will come out and say it formally. Nobody wants to alienate China. But that's off the table, to the best of my understanding. Now, when you say the other infrastructure projects, does it really matter if it's the Chinese who invest in the Tel Aviv subway or in the light rail system that's being built? Well, the contracts have to have various clauses dealing, let's say, in an emergency, Israel takes it over, something like that. I mean, there are ways of dealing with these threats, with these problems that can resolve the issue. There was a big flap. I don't want to go into detail. There was probably one of the worst crises in the history of the U.S.-Israeli relationship was in the late 90s, early 2000s over the Falcon aircraft, the Harpy system. Again, I'm not going into detail. Israel, it was the beginning of what was at the time supposed to be a multi-billion-dollar arms relationship between China and Israel. The Chinese thought that Israel was going to become their primary market for weapons. And the United States intervened and put the screws on Israel rather brutally. And Israel was forced to cancel the deal, to repay the Chinese a few $100 million for the first deal that had already been signed, and losses of billions of intended deals. To this day, the Chinese haven't bought a penny's worth of Israeli arms since then. And this is over 20 years ago. We don't want that to happen in the commercial sector. So what we have to do here is adhere to the American demands where they're really serious, and most of them are, and find a way to do it in a way that we don't lose the connection with China, which is also very important.
One final question concerns another, power that's been, whose influence has been growing in the region, and that is Russia. How do you see the Israeli relation? I mean, with Russia, is Russia's increasing influence in the Middle East a strategic threat to Israel, or is it something that Israel actually can partner with? Israel can actually work with Russia to meet shared interests? Is Russia a threat or maybe even a potential ally in the Middle East?
The United States is not playing as much as it used to, nearly as much in the region. It probably started in the latter part of President Bush's administration following the failure of the war in Iraq, and the U.S. started retrenching, and it really took off under President Obama. And despite the harsher rhetoric coming from President Trump, it has continued throughout the Trump presidency. Now, that doesn't mean that the United States isn't playing. Of course it's playing. And in the nuclear issue, the Iranian nuclear issue, it's still a big player. But it's playing much less than it used to. It's not playing coherently. There doesn't really seem to be much of a well thought out strategy in pretty much any area. The military presence is much less than it is. And even if you're going to play a more limited role, it's not a thought out and consistent role. Okay, so we saw there was one attack against the Syrian use of chemical weapons. There were lots more of Syrian attacks since then. No American response. There was the one-off, the attack against the targeted killing of Mr. Sulaimoni. That was a half a year ago. We haven't seen other signs of military action. Other things are being done. I'm not denying it. Basically, what's happened is that there was a power vacuum in which the Russians stepped in and took advantage of it. Now, I also have to give Mr. Putin credit for some creative policy on his part. He's played a weak hand very, very well. Mostly he took advantage of the fact that the U.S. isn't playing. And it was a willingness, by the way, to sell arms and nuclear reactors to anyone in the region willing to buy them. And so we see Russia back in Egypt, selling them arms, including jet fighters, billions of dollars worth, and building Egypt's first 2 nuclear reactors, or one's already under construction. We see them trying to sell to other buyers, trying to make an inroad into Saudi Arabia, which has until now been an American monopoly. So far, they haven't gone too far, but they've tried, and in the UAE, in Algeria, throughout the region. And of course, the primary area where they took advantage of almost a complete power vacuum was in Syria. And it was a power vacuum because the country had come apart and because the US wasn't willing to play. Now, I think President Obama was right when he said, or he thought, that there were no good options for the United States at the time. And I wasn't in favor of some sort of major intervention. 500,000 people have been slaughtered, maybe more, maybe 600,000, and the US did nothing. But between a total intervention, nothing, there was more to be done. Mr. Putin sent in a squadron of aircraft, in essence, 0 ground troops. It was enough in 2015 to turn the tide. The Iranians were already there. They had already saved the regime in 2012 when Iran and Hezbollah, when they intervened. In 2015, the tide was turning against them, but all they needed was this limited Russian intervention. President Obama at the time said, oh, this is going to end up being Russia's Vietnam. It hasn't. Limited intervention, and from their point of view, a major return. Iran is doing everything it can to set up a forward operating base against Israel and Syria, in essence, to turn Syria into a second Lebanon, another 130,000, 150,000 rockets. Only here they're trying to set up not only that, but actual air, ground, and naval bases of their own in Syria. Now, I'm the guy who's always advocating moderation. Remember, I said of the 5 points to the recommended Israeli national security strategy, the first one is restraint. And the third one was emphasis on defense. We cannot allow the Iranians to do this in Syria. And if that means, well, so far we're doing it with limited strikes under the radar, but if it means war, then we're going to have to go to war over this because this is unacceptable. Well, the US isn't playing there. So who do we turn to? Russia. Russia, ever since the Soviet Union, has actually become a friendly country to Israel. We have a very good bilateral relationship. We have strong differences over what's happening in Syria, over Iran, and especially the Iranian nuclear program. But Russia's policy here isn't anti-Israel. It is in reality, but it's not intended against Israel. We have to work with them. They undertook to keep Iran 60 kilometers from the border, they haven't lived up to it. They've done something. The US hasn't. So that's the reality. You work with who's there. I hope that the next president, whoever it is, a few months from now, will be more deeply involved.
Okay, well, I am. That's all we have time for, I'm afraid. I want to thank all of the audience for joining us. I want to particularly thank Professor Charles Freilich for that really sober, but very, very sensible and detailed and insightful analysis of Israel's strategic situation, the various challenges that it faces. I want to remind all the audience members that this webinar will also be posted on online on our website. So if you want to watch it again or share it, please do so. And join us for future webinars from the Nazarian Center for Israel Studies. Finally, thank you again, Chuck, for joining us today. I will also be having recording a podcast with Professor Freilich soon, so I'd encourage you, if you want to hear more of his expert analysis, to listen to our podcast, Israel in Depth. Thank you all for joining us, and goodbye.
Thanks again for having me, Bill.